Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Hard Talk. Today we are joined by veteran Ken Ali, veteran journalist. At 4:30, we are then joined by MP Parry, and at 5:30, we are joined by Deputy Political Leader Kevin Saron. Ken, just before last time, if you lean back, so you're perfect right now, but if you lean back, I'm gonna lose your mouth a little bit. So
Okay,
just keep that in mind when you're
certainly.
talking. If you lean back,
Okay,
I'm gonna see too little of you.
right.
So right now you're perfect, but
Good.
don't
I'll
lean back.
stay
Or
there.
if you lean back, take your phone with you.
Indeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, can you write for the Sunshine newspaper, but you also have a website
Yes.
where I imagine you put most of what I read on the Sunshine in on
Yeah.
that website.
And that's
And
counterpunchtt.com.
Counterpunch TT. Yes.
Counterpunchtt.com. Yes.
Okay. Now, let me just check because I'm not hearing you. It is my audio. Haha. Okay. Um, there was one article that stood out to me, which is, of course, why I reached out to you to come back. And what I found strange, I sort of dug through the other media houses and I didn't really notice that anyone brought it up. And I felt as though it was a scandal. It's a medical scandal, if you ask me. I think that's what you called it in
Mm-hmm.
the in your on your article. We've had 6 maternal patients at Mount Hope die, and the files have been lost. Did I summarize it?
Yes, yes, that's
Okay.
right.
So I'm going to hand it over to you now, and you hopefully, maybe we're not a reading generation. So maybe if we talk it out and I clip it and we put it somewhere, maybe persons will be enraged. We speak about, I know the last time we spoke, I asked what is what do we do again? So I want to be part of the media part of getting the communication out, hoping that we can get citizens involved, get them enraged for the right reasons, more
Yes.
than you know who writes a letter to who and who doing what to who and in all kind of married people business.
Yes, indeed. Marsha, thank you for having me. Thank you very much. Congratulations on the very good work you are doing. A lot of these media shows, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but around the world, are attracting a lot of viewership. I was reading just this morning about Kamala Harris, and some of the critics say she's not doing the big interviews, and her people are saying, well, she isn't. She's speaking with a number of media houses that may not be seen as the big traditional ABC and CNN and so on. There are a lot of other media houses, a lot of them digital like yours, who are reaching large audiences. So I congratulate you on your work. I've done a lot of this myself through the years, and it takes a lot of effort. Sometimes you wonder if you're moving the needle at all in talking. I've spoken for years, I've written for many more years, and so on. But you've got to do what you've got to do. And before I deal with the medical thing, there's also, which is really frustrating to see, I think more and more the society of Trinidad and Tobago is becoming complacent to the issues of the day. And the issues of the day are more critical than they have been. We have, apart from crime, which of course is evident everywhere and is affecting us everywhere, there are the quality of life issues I've been talking about, poverty and nutrition and so on. But the more and more you see the society is switched off from that, and you were asking me, what do you do about that the last time? One, you have to continue to do what you're doing. It is very frustrating to see uh, what excites people, um, and the
Yes.
trivia and the gossip and so on. I tell people I've been writing for many, many years. And until social media came up, you really didn't know what kind of responses you were getting. You may get some letters to the editor, you may get some calls and so on. But in real time now, social media shows you what is really important to the people. Regrettably, life and death issues are way down in the tally of issues that are of deep concern. At the Mount Hope Women's Hospital this year, 6 women have died. what really appears to be a malpractice. Now, having said that, we have had a history of deaths at that hospital and in maternal care generally in Trinidad and Tobago, going back to, well, time immemorial. Uh, I was looking at a report that's 20 years old, in which medical experts, were speaking about lowering the death rate. So we've had that. It doesn't make it right. We've had, in many cases, mothers dying, and in other cases, mothers and babies dying. It doesn't make it right, but it ties into the fact that the healthcare system is not what it ought to be. You know, remember the neonatal deaths at the Port of Spain General Hospital earlier this year that led to a PAHO investigation. And the PAHO investigation essentially found that the treatment wasn't what it ought to have been, and the medical care, in addition to its hygiene and sanitation issues, were relevant, that caused the deaths of about a dozen babies. Now, at Mount Hope Women's Hospital, 6 mothers have died since the start of this year. One of whom died 3 Sundays ago. She was a 41-year-old lady. She has 4 other children. She died. Now, as you rightly said, the files have gone missing, and nobody else has requested that. And I commend you for taking up the issue. Nobody else has asked why these facts have taken place. The Davlin Thomas, who is the CEO of Mount Hope, has not issued a statement, and there's a new board of directors at uh, North Central Regional Health Authority (NCRHA), which has not spoken on the issue either. I spoke in writing my story to Professor Bharat uh, Basaw, who is the head of the department, and he said he cannot speak to the media, which is correct. He referred me to Mr. Darwin Thomas, whom I couldn't contact. And so that's where it is. The rest of the media hasn't taken an interest in it, but we have had 6 lives lost. What I'm hearing in my investigation is that in most of, or if not all the cases, we had a junior officers attending to the cases. Now, when supervising officers are rostered, they are mandated to be within call to in case of the emergencies, in case there are emergencies. It is not known if that took place in this last case or in the other case. Now, all of those things, Marsha, you realize they're unanswered questions. All of those things require responses from the authorities. Now, the Minister of Health, poor thing, he has his own troubles these days. Um, but apart from that, I always make the
Have you reached
point.
out to the Minister of Health to ask him?
No, I have not. But I
Because I
think the
actually have
chief,
a note here. Maybe
uh,
it's a question that the opposition can raise in Parliament.
yeah, absolutely,
I think it's a
absolutely,
question that he needs to be to
yeah.
pose to him.
Now, the Chief Medical Officer of Health is the top public servant. And you recall the Chief Medical Officer of Health was given the country's highest award. And I raise questions about that because there are questions about the management of the COVID. There are questions about blocking Hindus from cremations because I researched this too. In India, they were permitting cremations because they're saying it was more hygienic and it was safer medically. Here we went and we blocked it. And it turns out that the chief medical officer of health is a very close relative of the Dharmacharya of the Hindu faith, who is the spiritual head of the Hindu faith, who also happens to be an official of the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha. But all of that is politics and religion and health mixed up in one. But just to make the point, he got the country's highest award. And somebody else whose name is in the mix these days is Dr. Miriam Abdul Richards. She got the country's second highest award, and we may yet hear more of her because she may be in the mix for that seat in St. Joseph, and that Mr. Dial Singh had
Yes.
this bad encounter at Nabingiba, and so on. But it requires, as just get back to the core issue that you raised, that the authorities be held accountable. I think that's the point you're on, and rightly so. What led to these deaths? What steps have been taken to ensure they have not been? Have there been investigation after every death? Every death is a human life lost, and a life who would a mother who would not bring up a child, assuming the child lived. Now, in one case, I heard, uh,
What really caught my attention was the fact that you said the files have been lost.
yes,
That seems like some kind of Netflix
yeah.
scandal. Are you
Now,
covering something up?
if if there were all right, if there were any inaccuracies in the report, the authorities would have responded, and they still have a responsibility to respond, to explain all the facts and the issue of the files also. What is the status with the files? And maybe somebody might be able to prize that out of them. And better yet, maybe we will find the files. I hope somebody could find the files, because wherever it is, it must be accessible to somebody. And we must find out what is in the files. It may be something that requires litigation. You remember the matter with respect to the neonatal deaths at the Port of Spain Hospital led to litigation, and then Ram Logan and others were involved.
Well, that was
And we
that was my next question coming up. You've spoken to some of these families, or is it just?
Yes, I did. I did. I don't know if they are planning litigation. In many cases, they're poor people who are nursing the hurt.
Well, I would think that this may be something that we could bring to. I have three lawyers in mind. Anand
Right.
Ramlogan. I know this is the type of case that he would take on.
Yes,
Dinesh Rambali and Kyle Taklal Singh. The three of them come to mind as lawyers well known in the public sphere that take on these types of cases, and they do pro bono work.
indeed. Well, this certainly is a matter because it's life and death and of mothers. We all have mothers. Mothers are critical to everything in our lives. And this is a public taxpayer funded hospital where there are a lot of other problems, by the way. After I wrote that, I got responses from other people in the hospital who were saying, well, investigate this and investigate that and investigate the other and so on. But Marsha, I do so much really on my own. I mean, I find investigative journalism has died. And I've been writing, one of the stories I'm writing for the next few days, just to permit me to divert very briefly,
Of course.
is this matter with Trail. Now,
Oh,
Trail,
well, I have that on my list.
right. Well, there's a guy who wrote that story last October, and you're speaking with that guy now. I wrote that story last year, and Dr. Munilal spoke about that in the budget debate last year. We're heading to another budget. And he raised that. If you go on counterpunchtt.com, if you go on Sunshine too, and if you Google Trail, you'll see the story coming up. And in that story, I spoke of a report that indicated a number of irregularities in the construction of those houses, Trail in Arima, a number of irregularities. Quite a lot of them. It's very interesting that the contractor had not built houses before, and he did not pay a performance bond. And further, has since gotten other contracts. And so we had Dr. Munilal, let's give him credit for that. He raised it during the budget debate, and the Minister of Housing, Camille Robinson Regis, so you're making a big fuss over nothing. We're dealing with that, and so on, and so on. And now I see the Guardian has written it almost 1 year after I wrote about it. And we have a lot of money jumping up here in steel band because these houses have not been up to speed at all. Because when I look at the report, it was an exhaustive technical report. And when I look at it, I say, well, I'm not a technical person in terms of those things, but I can't see how those houses would be livable, how you could live in that. And that was my thinking, and now I've proven to be correct.
Well,
But
listen, my husband is a contractor, and he says all the time, he ain't taking no HEC house. He says it all the time. He ain't taking no
okay,
HEC house. And I mean, and he's built HEC houses. He's actually been a contractor, years ago. But
hmm,
he would say now, and that's inside. That's he's a contractor, and just based on what he's seeing going on,
yeah,
and now we
because
see
it has been.
$72 million jumping up.
Yeah, and these
Just
things have been fraught in issues. I remember in 2010 when Mrs. Pasabi says I got into office, and the same Dr. Munila was Minister of Housing, and he took the media to several housing areas where the housing was just not up to speed, and so on. A lot of them were prefab houses and so on. And even before that, now fast forward after that to the last Alturas up in Morva on the Hills, and there was a commission of inquiry that the PNM did not participate in, and that commission was led by Mustafa Ibrahim, the High Court judge, and so on. Again, they built it on faulty land and everything, and so on. All of this is taxpayers' money. We treat those things as if, a flippant thing. That's money that could pay and help poor people. There's a lot of poverty in
Well,
this
the
country.
Minister of Education says there simply isn't enough money in the budget to
Yes.
fix schools.
Mm-hmm.
But then you
Yeah.
pay $10 million and for St. George's, and you
Yeah.
see that the school floods out a week after. So is
Uh,
it really an issue of not having enough money or not managing it or
Not managing
wasting
it
it?
well. If, yeah,
I mean, I
absolutely.
have a question. Well, I have a question for the MP. I mean, it's not a question that he can answer, but it will come up. The Office of the Procurement Regulator.
Well, yeah, I'm
They
glad you're on that. I
Right,
read that
because
report.
that report, yeah, that so you're seeing $5 billion going to contracts, and I want to know. I mean, is trust rail in there? If we dig into that report, if we get the answers, will we find that the same contracts that are jumping up, where we're seeing poor quality, are we going to see their names as part of the $5 billion that was improperly awarded?
Indeed, that's right. Well, permit me, because I read the procurement auditors, the procurement regulators report, 474 pages of it, and you know what? I'm reading through this, and I'm thinking of Jean Miles, and I'm saying here, this government does not like corruption busters. Jean Miles was the first we had, and she exposed the gas station racket. Now, this was a story this generation doesn't know much, just maybe briefly
That's
um,
fine.
to talk about it. She exposed that, and that involved big people in the country. You know what was their response to it? They harassed her, hounded her, and so on. And she died penniless and homeless on the streets of Port of Spain at just 42 years old. Jean Miles, beautiful person in her younger years, was a model and bright person, and so on, because she exposed the PNM. Now we have Jayanti Ramdas with respect to the Auditor General, and you see how they're taking her on. In between, we've had other people. We had Marlene Kudre in San Fernando City Corporation and others. Now, Beverly Khan is the new uh, procurement regulator. She has spoken about the absolute lack of compliance. There are 210 bodies ought to report to her, many didn't. Some don't even have a compliance officer. Some gave sole select. Sole select means you come, I give you the contract. Some, they were bid rigging, briberies, there were reports to her on bribery. Not a word has been uttered by the government on this. Not a word in response. Now, I don't think also those in opposition to the government are prosecuting the issue well, right? I want to say that openly. Because in bygone days, the government would have been accused 3 billion with respect to the Auditor General. Now all these monies here. If you can't properly account for it, we have to assume there's a lack of transparency and there was wrongdoing, there were financially sleaze and wrongdoing and so on. That is with respect to people's money. Now, in addition to that, remember the Public Procurement and Disposal of Assets Act was watered down and watered down and watered down. All right, and the Prime Minister himself went and justified the water down. All these agreements we have, government to government agreements with China and other places, are not subject to that law. The purchase of those hostile boats in Australia are not subject. All purchases like that, government are not subject. And those are where the big ticket items, those are the $100 million and $1 billion issues. And I find those things we're not talking to the country about, and the government is not on the defense, having to explain why literally billions of dollars are not accounted for. This is the first time we have a procurement law, and the procurement regulator was late with her report, and I criticized her in writing for that, saying that you didn't meet your deadline. But when I saw the report, I said it was worth the wait. She put in a lot of effort, and she said that all these agencies did not cooperate, they did not submit their reports, and there are all kinds of issues. And she was kind. I don't think she was harsh toward them because she's saying there's a new issue here and some people don't understand compliance and so on. But at the end of the day, this is the public's purse. This is the public's purse. And there are areas in
And
which,
we've had a long time. I mean, we've
yeah,
had a long this whole issue of the office of the procurement regulator. I mean, it's not now come in. It's been there for what, 10 years now.
mhm,
It's been there. So to say that they're not ready, I mean, I'm taking over from the interview that I will have with MP Parry, but
mhm.
to say that it's not ready just seems absurd to me. The young people will use the word wild, I guess. That's wild.
Yeah, and rightly so. To stress the point, the absence of accountability and transparency with the public's purse after we watered down the law, after we had the issue with the Auditor General, and in a time when we are borrowing $20 billion a year to balance the budget. And we're going to head into that in 2 months' time. There's another national budget. Our revenues are not matching our spending. The government is going to try to spend as much as they can over the next fiscal year because a general election is due. And there's this piece of law that the previously the government, the Central Tenders Board was the measure that was used with respect to procurement. They found ways to skirt that and so on. And the experts said, well, that it was not comprehensive enough. Bring in the procurement law, which we continue to whittle down and whittle down and whittle down. And now, even with what the version, skeletal version we have of it, there is not proper compliance. And it's not just a few agencies. There's the Ministry of National Security and other ministries, CARICOM Affairs and several other. Ministry of National Security procures a lot. They procure a whole lot of things. You remember the Prime Minister going to the Parliament a few Fridays ago and making the allegation with respect to the SSA and its procurement of ammunition and so on and so forth. This is the Ministry of National Security that procures vehicles, ammunitions, other surveillance equipment, and so on. And uh, they have not been transparent with the use of public money involving national security. What could go wrong there? Everything could go wrong. And again, to make the point, Marsha, that there is not a national outrage over that. We instead talking about the guy and the video and so on and the man's private life and so on. Something has to be wrong with the society when we can't be accountable.
I say it all the time. I say
Mhm.
we have the government that we deserve. And I saw somebody say, well, we could walk and chew gum at the same time. So because we're talking about terrans, don't mean we're not talking about, but we're not.
No,
I
we
can
don't.
go through my timeline, and the bottom
Mhm.
line is I can see.
Yeah,
Now, you I had a note because I wanted to end with some hope, in terms of you saying, you spoke about Kamala Harris not being on some of the bigger
yeah,
networks. And the last time that you spoke, we raised an issue with the Venezuelan gangs,
yeah.
and I clipped it and I put it onto my TikTok. And that is at some 47,000, nearly 48,000 views.
Wow.
So there is hope, and that's just on one platform. I would not have checked what it would have done on Facebook and whatnot, right? So there is hope that we can take these interviews. We can, I after I try to break them down into 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and sort of spoon feed the country. There is that hope that social media allows us,
Yeah.
and that's why I said to you, maybe we're not a reading population, maybe it's just in the newspaper. So if I were to bring Ken on and we speak about it, maybe if I just put a camera in front of my face, do a selfie, because we have to find a way. And I say to people all the time, I can tell, we have Children's Authority, they would have they put out reports all the time, and you're looking at some 14 new reports of child abuse every single day in Trinidad and Tobago. And I guarantee you, if I put out a video today, it will do 2,000 views.
Hmm. Well,
So
there
don't
are
say to me that, we could walk and chew gum. We
yeah.
can't. We're
Well,
not
no.
interested in the things
Well,
we should be interested in.
I have some nuanced views on this, and it is from my early era when we read a lot of newspapers. The Guardian was a broadsheet, and people spend more. People are busier now. Social media now. You consume news and you consume content in brief spurts. So we understand that. So you just have to prepare for that. But having said that, there is not an outrage. We be returned to being a nation of sheep. During the dark days, when Dr. Williams loomed large over the society, people were afraid to speak. People were afraid that they will check their or audit their taxes, and they'll find ways to harass them and harm them and so on. And remember, from 1971 to 76, there was no opposition in parliament and so on and so forth. All those things. There was the voting machines, which they said was rigged, and all those things. And then we became outspoken people in the NAR and so on, and we became and we spoke. We returned to an era now, in spite of the fact that everybody could be a publisher, everybody could be a reporter, literally everybody could, in which we have lost that sense of outrage over issues. The Calypsonians used to raise those issues. Public commentators. I mean, I don't know if you try to read some of the commentaries that journalists, the columns, I find they're so pathetically weak. With some exceptions, there are some exceptions who take on the issues of the day, but there are so many issues that escape the attention. That's why when I spoke of that matter with respect um, to the Venezuelan gang, that was well known in the US. President Biden had taken action. I referred to a 2-year-old report from CARICOM, a 2-year-old CARICOM report. It's not anything I made up, in other words.
Yeah.
The information was there. What led to the fact that people didn't know? One, investigative journalism is dead and buried. And two, we've lost a sense of outrage in the society over all the many wrongs. I know, having said that, it has to be prosecuted differently too. It has to be. Mr. Pandit took those things in an era before social media, and he went to the street corners and he spoke because he had a sense of personality. He was an actor too, and he broke down these issues, and he was vigilant in all roads led to quality of life issues with Mr. Pandey. All roads, if you called Mr. Pandey and say it's a nice, bright, sunny day, he was going to detail that into issues pertaining to bread and butter in society. How we articulate the issues is part of the thing, but the country has fallen asleep, and while quality of crime is one, I talk all the time, and people already speaks about it too, about the quality of life issues, the poverty in the country. I talk all the time about the widening gap between rich and poor and all of these issues. But I think, I know you have MP Parry there, and you got to respect his time. Um, I want to commend you on the work you're doing, and I want to encourage you to continue to do that work. And maybe you found the best recipe in that you have to break them out. You have to strip out these things into small pieces. It's different from when I started. We write long columns and commentary, and that's one of the reasons I don't write much on social media anymore,
Well, I
because
mean, Twitter gives you whatever ridiculous character it is.
yeah,
Sometimes I think, imagine, how do I do this in 30 seconds? No way. Like, who does a video in 30 seconds? So it's you will not believe me editing a video. I will try to find every little word that I can remove to make the video as short as possible. If I think that particular 2 words or 3 words was not necessary and I could naturally cut it, it cuts. Because the psyche of this generation, the
yeah,
first thing they look at is the length of the video. Am I
yeah,
going to watch it? Because if the length of the video too long, I'm not watching it.
yeah.
Then, when I'm telling people about how to do videos, I say, whatever you end with, start with. Because chances are you've built up and then you end the video, but nobody didn't watch the end. So
Well,
find a way to start over. Because if you don't catch them in 2 seconds, you've lost them. So there's
well, you're
so
an agent of
much
change,
to this.
Marsha. You're an agent of change. And times have changed from the traditional media. I started in traditional media many years ago, And let me tell you this, and which you're probably aware of, traditional media is dying quickly in the US. Daily newspapers in small societies are shutting down all the time. Digital media is taking over. It was some sadness because as
And
a
I'm going to
writer,
bring MP Parry in. You are welcome. Don't leave. I know that you have to go out,
yeah,
but
I have to.
don't leave until you have to leave. You know,
Okay,
I'm
well, maybe
sure
I
MP
can. Well,
Parry
I don't
does
want
not.
to take the MP's time, I don't want
No,
to
but
take the.
but it's a conversation.
Okay.
It's a conversation.
Well, maybe you
And
want
I'm
to welcome MP
Yes, so
Parry.
let's welcome MP on, and we will get into his things. But I'm sure that he can join in, as we end and close, and we will talk. We're talking the Office of the Procurement Regulator report. So I mean, maybe you might have questions, even better questions. I could learn from you. um,
No, well, MP, we were saying I took the time, and I know you did too, to read the procurement regulators report, and it is damning on the state of governance in this country. 474 pages worth the read because she's speaking of the lack of compliance and the flippancy they have in it. And I was saying to Marsha a while ago that includes the Ministry of National Security, which procures a lot of stuff. And, like, they don't care. I mean, there are 210 public bodies that ought to be compliant. Some do have procurement officers and so on. And and we were tying that into the fact that there's a lack of outrage over that. And that ties in to the Auditor General, which Auntie Ramdas. And then there's a final tie-in, which is the overarching one for me, of Jean Miles. I know Jean Miles is long before your time. It's before my time too, but I've read so much about her. And she's a revered person in Trinidad and Tobago's history. She stood up against the gas station racket and bubble and so on. And they hounded her till she ended up on the street, penniless, homeless, died on the street. There's a woman who stood up against corruption. But I'm talking too much.
Ken, thank you very much. Thank you, Marsha. I hope you guys are hearing me.
we are.
I Ken, I want to answer. I think the question that I hear you asking about, why is there no outrage
Mm-hmm.
on many of these things? That procurement report borderlined on scandalous. Who has the time to go through a 475-page report? Probably one or two of us, right?
Yeah.
But to answer that question, I want to give you a personal experience I had this week. I went to the Integrity Commission this week to submit my 2023 file. So I went up to the receptionist. I told her that, look, I'm here to submit my report and so on. And she looked at me and she says, well, are you here to submit for yourself or someone? I said, no, for myself. And she says, well, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I am saying you are an employee of the Integrity Commission,
Mm-hmm.
whose job it is to understand or know most of your senior public officials in public life. And let's assume you don't know Parry from Yarrow. I mean, recent machinations would have had me plastered across every media house, every newspaper, and the young lady didn't know who I was. So I said, well, look, clearly I'm not doing the job that I think I'm doing. But it spoke to the disconnect of our young people with the politics of the day and the issues of the day. Because if she would have been even looking at the front page of any newspaper, she would have figured out who I am. So I introduced myself and we sorted the matter out. And it comes back to the issues that Ken was speaking about early on, about the cyber crime issues in the hospital system, where if you try today, if you had a matter in the court with an accident and you try to go back to Southwest Regional Health Authority now to find a medical report to go to court, you may not even get it. What's the impact of that on the social fabric of this country? You have all of these things happening and there is no outcry, but yet Terrence is all over the world. I am seeing people making parodies from as far as Europe, England,
Wow.
Germany, right? So, I mean, this public procurement issue, to me, it's not surprising it has collapsed. Why? Because we raised several of these matters during the debates in terms of the fact that, look, every time the minister came to parliament, he watered it down. He took out the teeth from it. So what we had was a piece of legislation that was filling a mandate of a manifesto promise to the PN.
Yes.
That is what it was.
Yes.
They
Yes.
had no intention to ever make it real, make it happen. Because the key issues, Ken, I mean, I skimmed a lot of the areas of the report. I just couldn't find time to read the 500, the 400 pages.
Mhm.
But I pulled out a few key things that I remember reflective in the debate. We asked, what was the capacity requirement for these public agencies to have, the human resource requirement? You know, were they doing anything? When you look at the public bodies, right? The infrastructure that was required to have for the reporting, for all of these things, nothing was in place. So it is not surprising to me that, there were two agencies that I read that was supposed to call, I won't say agencies, but organizational units who were supposed to guarantee certain things happen. One was the plan. There's a schedule that you had to submit of activities for planned procurement activities called the ASPAA. There was about 60% compliance.
Mhm.
There's something called the Disposal Advisory Committee, PDAC, which was supposed to provide oversight. Only 16% of those of public bodies have those agencies. So it's not surprising that this entire thing collapsed. I could tell you what's happening even worse. With the last amendment the minister made, where he gave basically say, look, if the tender is under $1 million, you don't need to go through the procurement process. Two things started to happen. A lot of the sole selection tendering started back, where you pick your partner and your friend. Or two, there were some agencies that is so afraid of the legal ramifications. Although these contracts under $1 million, they did not need to go through the details of the procurement requirement. Some of these bodies decided, hey, we're going to follow it still. So what you had was a complete slowdown and dismantling of a lot of work. So, I mean, they're in a lot of mess. I don't think that, it's going to improve anytime soon. I think the procurement regulator has a lot of work to do. And I do not believe that in an election year, the state, the government is going to pay any bloody attention to this, because they need to spend a lot of money. And the faster the money goes through the system, to politics, and to put money on the ground to buy votes, I think there will be no focus on fixing any of these issues going forward. That's just my subjective view, Ken.
I agree. No, I agree with you. I don't think it's subjective. I think it's objective. And I also think that eventually that legislation will wither and divine the way the integrity legislation. The previous PNM administration put a lot of emphasis on integrity legislation, integrity, and so on. And that has been found to be ineffective, and it was politically used against Mr. Pandey. And remember, the Privy Council spoke about how the chief magistrate was extremely biased and so on. And so that legislation too has not held teeth. And while that is happening, MP and Marsha, we have literally billions of dollars for which we're spending, and there's no proper accountability. And
And
then,
Ken, one of the other biggest challenge that a lot of the public bodies faced also was that less than 15% of all contractors met the requirements as per the Office of the Procurement Regulator. So whereas you may have had 20 vendors doing a similar job, one out of the 20 of them may have been qualified. And it means that for the 5 years or the 6 years, there was no focus on the contractors, on the government service support persons to either fix their issues, get their paper. Simple things like tax clearance, VAT clearance, NIS clearance. Some of them failed because they may have had something outstanding 2 years ago. They may have an audit going on. And when you look at 13.8% in terms of the report, it means you can't run a government. You cannot run a government with only 13% of your capture of the persons to support your projects and your ministries. Your hands are tied. Nothing would happen. And
well, I
they've
just
done
want to
that.
make I want to make this last point, and then I'll leave you all because I have to head out too. But the matter of Petrotrin, they're looking to lease or sell Petrotrin. They've gone through several incarnations in recent time. Jindal and that came and went. There's Oando from Nigeria and so on. But they were shortlisted. They had a committee headed by Vishnu Danpal, the former PS, and so on. They had meetings in the Ministry of Energy and so on. So the government was seeking to make an announcement because the government, they say everything ties on to politics. The government is seeking to win this seat called Claxton Bay, which is Point up here now. They're going to rename it to Claxton Bay. Those fence line communities, MPU in particular, know that they've been adversely affected by the shutdown of I don't know if this urban-based government understands the impact of the shutdown of Petrotrin. Apart from the 5,500 workers, or I see a place, I mean, a lineman spot, MPU, not a lineman, but I've named Carrot Shed, which is an institutional place in Marbella, where everybody from MP to the man in the street go and hang out, and the man close it down, he said. And I know a guy who runs a tire shop, he closed it down, and stationery, anyway, all of that. So they were seeking now to make an announcement between the periods of independence and republic, when we have this fervor of patriotism and so on. And they went through all of these things, and they have not been able. Now, the last thing is the Dan Paul committee is making some recommendation, and then they realize that the shortlisted companies are not yet compliant with the procurement law, which should have been the first measure you take. So, wait, are you all, as you just said, in terms of things, electricity and all this. And MP, you talk about this all the time in Parliament, ease of doing business. How we've fallen back in terms of all areas of ease of doing business. It is astounding how we have collapsed on these issues of bureaucracy and so on. Everything, implementation is an issue with this government, a huge issue. 9 years ago, they promised us a statistical institute. Remember that, to replace
Yeah.
CSO? That hasn't taken place. And it is, I say fascinating, but it's dumbfounding. It is deeply disturbing that all of these things are taking place. But
Before you go, let me ask you just one question. Let me just reverse the role. How much you think the fact that we are not a trusting society, that we have to depend on legislation and regulation and rules for us to do the right thing. We just don't trust the people around us that we will do the right thing. So we bog down the system with 10,000 pages of regulation because we don't trust you. And I think that is really the key that is holding us back as a society. We don't trust the next man.
I wonder about the society we've built in post-independent society. And Marsha, some other time we must talk about what has happened to this post-independence. We have some strong views on that too, but I don't want to take the time. I want to tie in the point you just made here, MP. We saw what happened with Terence Dialsig. We saw the video. But, tying to your point, we're not a trusting society. Some people say, nah, man, that man looked too composed, boy. That man was doing nuts. That man was talking. No,
I got a meme pointing to the screen black. How the screen could be black if he was on the phone. You want to talk about investigative journalists?
When I saw it, I mean, instinctively, I felt sorry for him. I said, there's a man who's a victim of crime. Why would he make this up? But we're not, as you rightly said, we're not a trusting society in no aspects of it. We trust nobody. And surveys have found that, we don't trust the media, we don't trust the police service, we don't trust the parliament, and so on. It is, unfortunately, the state in which we've reached. And, and I promise this is my last point. When we look at the people who were our major contributors post-independence, Reginald Dumas has died, Anna Mahes has died, Pandey has died. All of these people who were achievers have died. This has been on my mind for a while. Hazley Crawford Marsha, an MP, won Olympic gold in 1976. You know where was his major training place? He said Magdalen Kane Fields. He won Olympic gold because that generation had a purpose of success and accomplishment. 2 Olympics now, last 2, we ain't win a single medal. We ain't win a single medal. It is the watering down of the society. When we give senior council status, and when we give country's highest award, when we give in an honorary doctorate at UTT and some at UE and so on, we water down the society. But I think I've said enough.
Well, no, because
Marsha,
now I'm going to take you to task with that one as being
which one?
a younger member of society.
Yes, certainly. So we could have a
So
debate.
no, I'm going to take you to task. You can't leave yet. So
Okay, sure, sure.
because back in another time before my
Uh-huh.
time, we had sheer grit. You had talent, you had hard work and determination. So that was fine. It was more of an even playing field. What you have is the land of technology now. So you do have countries who can put you in some machine and say, listen, you see a calf? This calf points something off of that calf. And so we need you to fix this. And the playing field is not the same. So someone with grit and determination and it can only get you that far. It honestly. And so I want to say yes, there was a success-minded generation, but the truth is where technology has taken, and I could speak to sport because that's just something that I like and involved in and whatnot. It makes a big difference. As a goalkeeper, I remember being one of the older goalkeepers, and we used to use cricket pads. Lo and behold, these $10,000 goalkeeping pads came. They were foam, some version of whatever, so they were light, and you didn't feel a thing compared to my toes would still end up bleeding using these big cricket pads. So immediately, the goalkeeper who came to national training with those big fancy pads had a benefit, because when you're standing facing a shot in cricket pads, your eyes flinch because you're human and you're feeling the pain. You can't run to the line fast and run back to the line as fast as somebody who is in next to nothing gear. So we have to also account for the fact that the rest of the world has advanced and we refuse to advance. And I know that this is where MP Parry will come in, because we have a society that talks about digitization and we lining up in hot sun and rain to pay property tax. Now,
Indeed.
before you go,
Yes.
though, I wanted, because I always, let me tell you how I do I'm going to quote you now. I always think TikTok. So before you leave, in 1 minute, if you can, break down the 475-page OPR report for me.
What the procurement regulator found is that the 210 government bodies that are the taxpayer-owned bodies that ought to be compliant with the Office of the Procurement Regulator and the Public Procurement and Disposal of Assets Act. Most did not, and those that did not fully comply. And there were a lot of sole select, there were obvious bid rigging and various areas of fraud and wrongdoing. In addition to that, she got a lot of reports that she's investigating the way she could, because she has a shortage of resources that indicate wrongdoing with the public purse. All of this amounts to literally billions of taxpayers' dollars. So while we finally got a weakened version of the procurement law on the books and we've got a procurement regulator involved, she wasn't able to, on behalf of the taxpayers, to discern the spending, to keep tabs on the spending of the taxpayer. Now, I want to also say this, and this goes beyond a minute, but let me also put some context that the previous regulator, his name was Munilal Lalshan, a good man, and I hope he comes back and serves this country. I don't know him, never met him, but I've read about him and so on. They're good people in the society. Another one we must talk about one day is the former president of the Industrial Court, who they hounded out of office. Her name is Deborah Thomas Felix, from your constituency, MP, and so on. She's just written a book called You're Fired. But Munilal Lalshan said 5-point-something billion of taxpayers' money lost every year to corruption and inefficiency. You know what they did? They ran along the clock on him and they replaced him. So that is where we are.
Marsha, and he said that $5 billion was with the watered down legislation.
No, well,
no, he did. No. Because I remember reading when he said, even with it the way it is, even with it being imperfect, right now, because he was
Yeah.
challenging open, give us a chance,
Yes.
stop going
Yeah.
back, stop trying to perfect it. And he was saying, even with it as it is right now, with all the so-called imperfections, we could save $5 billion. Just get it started.
Absolutely. That's right. That's right. Marsha, thank you for having me. I am
Thank
always
you very much.
available to you. MP, it's great exchanging with you. We'll be in
Sure.
touch. Yeah.
All right. Take
Best
care, Ken.
wishes. Okay. Bye.
Thank you so much, MP Parry. So we made your job a little bit easier because Mr. Ali ended up talking about the procurement regulator report. Um, there's two things that came out of what you guys, both of you said. No one has the time to read these reports. And Mr. Pandey would break down the issues, because I find that, for me, is my personal mission, I guess. I always say UNC too smart for their own good because they talk in a language that nobody understands. And PNM talks in a language that everybody seems to understand. So they have a way of this propaganda machine. So it's the best selling book versus the best written book. And so when Mr. Ali said that, Basdio Pandey had a way of breaking down the issues, I don't know, but I'm not sure how much of the interview you watched, but I brought on Ken Ali because he did a story in the Sunshine newspaper, and I felt as though it got no traction. I was looking for it in other media houses. I was looking for it everywhere else. And I said, but 6 maternal deaths in Mount Hope. And then it becomes a scandal worse because the file's gone missing and nobody has raised this issue. I said, so I'm going to try to use TikTok and social media and whatever I think I can to bring some outrage. And I'm going to hope we'll see after this.
But Marsha, let me ask you this: what of the families of those 6 persons who died? Did they accepted it? Nobody said anything.
Well, so
Mr.
Ali. So I asked Mr. Ali if he has contact with them, because that's the next step. I'm going to ask them if they know of somebody called Dinesh Ramboli, Kyle Taklal Singh, and Anand Ram Logan. And I'm going to offer that we bring a lawyer involved and get to the bottom of this. Because what I also have realized, and I'm certain that you would experience this, I don't know if it's beaten into submission. I don't know what it is, but we don't seem to know that we have a right to fight for things. So we could cuss and get on, and we seem to be angry people, because we cuss and get on for somebody give me a bad drive or whatever. But the things to cuss and get on for and to demand, we go, you know what? Don't worry. And while I believe in God's sovereign will, I do believe there's a space to fight for oppression and fight for justice.
Marsha, I think what is causing the non-interest, I think the political environment have spoiled the space terribly. The issue of trust is something that I believe the wider electorate, and more so our young people, have disconnected with. I went to a prayer a couple of nights ago and I met a young attorney. And she's introducing herself, and immediately she says, well, MP, I don't get involved in the politics. I said, well, why? She said, well, these, it does nothing for them. The country is continuing on the same trajectory. Their voices are not heard. And I say, well, that is the problem. I say, y'all are not speaking out enough. I say, if you ask any marketing company today, if they are targeting a market, they look at the 18 to 35-year-olds because they have the biggest and loudest voice. And I told her, I say, if you and your colleagues and the folks in your age group don't make your voices heard on matters, then we will continue on the same trajectory. And that's the problem. When you look at history, when you look at the French Revolution, the Arabian Revolution, the role of the university class, of the intellectual class, when you see the roles that they played in these revolutions, you could understand why today people feel that things not changing, because sometimes I feel that there is the belief that the 18 or 19 MPs who are in opposition that are sitting in the parliament, that is only our voices ought to be heard. So I will ask, and the heads of the IRO living in this country, the heads of medical associations, are you living in this country? The heads of the business association, are you living in this country? Journalists, are you living in this country? Or is it only rhetoric the opposition MPs are talking? Because I am amazed of the silence. Sometimes you have a few fellas who have been on the road for years, who have been championing, and they still going to champ, like Ken, and you have Inshan Ishmael and a few other fellas who come out every day and they champion things. Marsha, you have been on the ground for years fighting. But when you ask yourself, why is there this silence? And that worries me. That they feel that, all right, it's only the parliamentarians, because that is what we are being paid for, to go in parliament. And just before I close off this point, I did a TikTok. I tried to do a TikTok, I must say, on this issue of the property tax and the disadvantage that residential homeowners was being placed in versus a commercial property owner. And one of the commentary that a point that guy made was that he said that I must sing before I talk, because if businesses have to pay the taxes, that it will skyrocket all the prices. And my response to him was that, listen, if you review what I said, not for 1 minute did I agree that anybody have to pay the taxes. I'm of the view sometimes that there's something called speed read and speed listening. And some of our people, they read the first 2-3 lines and they move forward. And I think it's because of the TikTok age. I mean, 30 seconds. You want me to tell you the story in 30 seconds, but you miss the gut. You miss the things that you want to explain to people that they can carry. But what you do, you satisfy the initial desire for the bacchanal within 30 seconds. And that's where the problem really lies. So there is no easy fix, Marsha, but we have to trug on. We have to continue on. Those of us in public life who has a voice in the media, in the parliament, I mean, we have to continue, and we hope as the society evolves, more and more people pay attention. Because, I mean, we make issues, we raise issues in the parliament, and nobody listens. And then you come and you tell me, well, you're making a point now, what do we could do to stop it? But we want the parliament. Simple majority. We raise the issues. We didn't hear any outcry in the country. The government went and passed the law, passed the amendments of the property tax with simple majority. We can't stop the government at the end of the day with simple majority law. And now you'd find there is this whole concept of necessity, where the state, the governments are now using and say, look, although we have these constitutional requirements, these protections, the law of necessity, if something becomes necessary and urgent, then you can bypass the 3/5 constitutional majority in certain pieces of legislation. And that is where the country, as we mature as a society, we may have to pass legislation going forward that tramples on Section 4 and 5 of the Constitution because of necessity, like the Global Forum laws that we had to pass the other day, right? That is a national, international requirement. It did trample on a few rights of privacy and so on. But what we had to do, we had to trust. And we talked about trust a while ago. We now have to trust the public officers, that we are given these powers, the judges, the magistrates who have to read these tax laws, the public officers in the BIR or the new TTR. We have no choice but to trust that when they act, they will act in the best interest of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, because we're going to have to give them those powers because of necessity and in conformity with a lot of global regulations today. So we'll see how that goes, because I think, more of that type of legislation is coming.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, I don't trust those persons that are in public office right now. And I don't think persons generally trust them. It's a conversation, I just came from piano with Jesse, and I was saying to the piano teacher, I said, at the end of the day, citizens need to understand that the power rests with us. That's the bottom line. You spoke about the French Revolution, and I use Ukraine because people know about Ukraine now all of a sudden. I said, back when there was a revolution, the square isn't coming to mind, but
Tiananmen Square.
It was, it did, when the opposition came to lend support, they said, we don't want y'all, because we do not want it to be political. And it started with young people, university students, the average person on the street, and persons who didn't know everything, but they just knew how they were affected. They knew that something was going on with their democracy, and who made soup, and who put up these, well, not sandbags, but whatever bags they used to protect themselves because the police were coming. And sometimes I wonder if we keep speaking, because hopefully if you say it enough times, I use the Cambule riots all the time, because I say, you jump up Monday and Tuesday and you have a grand time. Are you aware that blood was shed for that right? For your right to jump up on a Monday and Tuesday, we had bloodshed. Many of the things that we enjoy now, my hair curly because some race mixed with some race mixed with some race, that required bloodshed. It required men and women who were prepared to lay everything down. We can't even lay one contract down. We can't. When persons say, Kamala give you this and you're ungrateful, I say, all I understand, I couldn't eat for a year after going up against a certain prime minister. Are you mad? Like the sacrifice that it took to go up against a certain prime minister. And I'm not sure, how do we get these citizens? Because they're bothered. I think you hear the murmurs. We all hear the murmurs. We all frustrated. Everybody frustrated. I argued with Ken last time he was on the show. I say, Ken, nobody here. You're singing to the choir. The country does not trust PNM. The vast majority of the country wants Rowley gone. One, we do not believe Kamala is a viable option, but I might save you the safe seat for that, and I go say it, right? We don't trust any of the current persons to lead. But what is the solution? We have a report. We have the Auditor General talking about was it $5 billion? Her three, she was $3 billion. $3 billion gone missing. Is it that they're not understanding? Are we not breaking it down simply? Maybe you can, I brought you here to talk about, and our time is disappearing. I brought you here to talk three things. So I'm going to, if you permit me, we can move away from the Office of the Procurement Regulation Bill. I think we've covered it, hopefully as simply as we can. Unless persons, maybe we could explain what that report is. That's about the only thing I think. How do you break it down to a society where we have a very low pass rate for SCA, we have a low pass rate for CSEC? Unfortunately, we have persons that are going through the system that cannot read and write very well, that are not able to critically think through issues. What is this report? What is the bill? How does it impact them?
Well, so to kind of make it very, very short, what the procurement regulators told us is that we are not in a space where we are able to protect the public funds from abuse. And for every $1 that we lose in terms of corruption or in terms of mismanagement of the public purse, it hurts the average citizens. And when you talk about 3 billion or 4 billion or 5 billion, I tell you, the IMF and the IDB, they estimate that globally $1 trillion is lost due to corruption in public spending worldwide. And when you look at that kind of money, if you were to do the right things to protect that money, talk about the amount of roads that you can fix, drains, furniture you can buy for schools. Can talk about breaking it down to bread and butter issues, right? When in a regional corporation, that you can cut down wastage, mismanagement, bad spending, how much more you can do for your burgesses in terms of street lighting, painting, signs. Those are the things that, we have to understand that, we have to protect the public purse as much as we can. Because remember this, the workforce in Trinidad and Tobago is probably a little under, around 600,000 persons, right? That is the workforce where taxes are collected and it is spent on the other 750,000 people. So basically, half of the country is supporting the whole country in terms of taxes, right? Now, when you started talking, I know we'll segue into the whole issue about small business and these penalties and so on. But if we don't be able to utilize the money, the revenue that the state is earning in the most efficient way, it is going to impact the everyday lives of every citizen. And you're talking about early childhood, young children, the social network. Um, I am not saying that we are a nation of con men, but there are people who try to abuse the system. There will always be people, but there are people who want a hand up rather than a handout. And our policies ought to frame that. And in those policies, we need to measure how we spend the money. I want to make one example before I close this point. During the People's Partnership, there was a program in the URP where mothers of children with cerebral palsy and a couple of those other um, type of diseases where mobility and so on amongst children is difficult, they were able to register with the URP and get the same $80 or $90 a day for 5 days for the week that they could stay home and look after the child. Because you can't go to work and then you have to pay somebody to look after a child who is really, really challenging. So it makes sense for you to stay. As the government changed in 2015, I think Minister Hines was minister at that time, and the first thing he did, he shut that program down because he said there was a lot of abuse and corruption. Now, may it have had corruption and abuse? Absolutely. This is Trinidad and Tobago. But the program itself was so badly needed because today in my office, I get, young women coming every day asking, begging, hey, MP, help me get a job in the corporation. Help me get a job at URP. I have this child home. I can't get this and I can't get that. And I'm saying, if we protect the public first and we get the most efficient use of the money, we can look after those most vulnerable people in our society, those people that really need the hand up rather than a handout. So to close the procurement thing, it's a lot of work that has to be done. I hope the procurement regulator sits with the Minister of Finance in this budget. There are a lot of inefficiencies in terms of manpower, HR training in all those agencies. Deal with that, and hopefully within the next 12 months, they can see a better report coming that more compliance is happening. Otherwise, we'll end up in the same foolishness all over again in the next fiscal year.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So the OPR report would have spoken about $5 billion awarded improperly. Now, of course, you're seeing a $72 million HTC housing development. They have to mash it up and start over because it was not done properly. The contractor in question does not have a track record of building houses, but was awarded a $72 million project. Is there a way for us to find out who forms this $5 billion that was awarded improperly?
Well,
because there has to be something that comes out of the report other than just telling us what we know.
Well, I think a lot of the data that comes out may be a bit speculative as well. They would look at big figures, broad figures. They would look at issues on across the whole spectrum, and they look at some numbers. What will be more important to me is how do we not have those mistakes happen again, right? I mean, I don't want to call the contractor name. You would have seen the Office of the Procurement Regulator stop 2 or 3 projects within the last 3 months where people file objections, which is a good thing. I think the agency had to pull back one of them with a Chinese company. Now, my question really is how do we continue to make sure that these things are resolved, that we do not have another development? I mean, this was to knock down $76 million worth of houses right now. I mean, look what that money could have done to fix schools. Look what's happening in St. George's, right? And we have to make sure that the legislation protects us going forward. I think that is how, we will, in terms of capturing and holding on to the public funds and make sure it goes in the right place. But again, you need political will. You need trusting people. Sometimes I always find that, you talk about locking up politicians, locking up ministers. locking up people in the political circles. But what about the quality surveyor, the public officer who has a duty to protect the public purse and make sure that the contractor puts 3 inches of pitch rather than an inch and a half? What is his role in that when he doesn't do his job? So I mean, I think if they had a jail, we got to fill up this jail with plenty of people in it. Because culturally, we need to start getting people to do their jobs and don't be afraid. Don't let any minister of government push you to do anything. Push back. No minister of government could fire you as a public officer. Say, no, I'm not doing it. Right? And I think that's the problem. We don't have, I mean, I don't want to use the phrase here, but you need a little more guts sometimes to push back and say no to foolishness at the end of the day. So, but there's a lot of work to be done, and I trust the procurement regulator will look at these matters and try our best to see if she can get the funding to start getting the resolution to these things. More so in the local government bodies where they're lacking the human resource requirement, technological requirement to really push these things. Getting your regulator, getting your procurement officers, getting the manpower to do the job. That is where the challenge is.
So you think right now, even we just don't have manpower to get it done properly?
We have manpower. Do they have the skill set to do it? You take a regional corporation that has 11 or 1,200 employees now, right? And we know how these corporations operate. A lot of political packing in these agencies, and may have people with 4 and 5 subjects, 3 subjects, 2 subjects. Where is the money coming for to contract lawyers, engineers, civil engineers, quality surveyors? Where's the money coming for that? Where are we going to pull these people from? You can't fire the people in the corporation because they are full-time employees. They are protected by unions, right? And I'm not saying anything is wrong with that. All I'm saying, now we have to find 100 new people to drive property tax, procurement legislation. That requires a skill set, a human resource management system. And nothing was put in place to deal with that on the ground in the public offices. Right? That is why we're in such a mess. That is why the regulator had to put out this type of report, which is scandalous at the end of the day.
Give me 2 seconds before we move on to the next topic. Bisnath Prasad is saying hello back. Winston, thank you very much for your kind words. Yeah, I agree. Diego Martin West is not satisfied with the Prime Minister. And I blame Diego Martin West all the time because I said if he couldn't become an MP, he couldn't become a Prime Minister. So Diego Martin West in particular, you all are to blame for Rowley. 76 million. Wow. That should be enough for the PNM to get voted out. Yes, Winston, I agree with you. And that we need, Winston, you need in your little area of influence to get citizens angry for the right causes. We have to be upset that somebody spent this money. Well, I see HEC today was trying to pull it back, saying they didn't pay him anything. But then they're going to go to court and it's going to be a big battle. The bottom line is we have persons who are struggling to make ends meet. And low-income housing getting torn down because somebody didn't do their job. And according to MP Parry, and he's right, a lot of people didn't do their jobs. And maybe we need to become a country where we are just all prepared to sacrifice a little bit. Because I saw somebody say, they were saying to Beverly, her last name is Khan, I think.
Yes. Khan.
They were saying to her, they're going to come after you. And you heard Ken Ali speak about Jean Miles. And it is very tough. It is very tough when you go against the status quo. MP Parry, you will know about that. I know that, and some people say that you all are being victimized. Would you like to touch on that?
No. I rather spend the time talking about the real evils in this country. Poor performance, crime, collapsing infrastructure. I think that is more important. I mean, I'll tell everybody, the United National Congress as a party, there are internal issues, and I am dealing with it internally as best as I can. I remain committed to the party that I joined many, many years ago, to the principles. I will continue to represent the people of Mayo the best that I can. I have whatever amount of months left on the lifespan of this term, and I am prepared to continue in one way or the other. So we can move on some other
Moving on to the Global Forum Bill.
Yes.
I know that's not the proper name, but uh, basically what you're seeing all over social media, memes, persons talking about the doubles man go out to register or pay a $10,000. You know, the red mango woman might have to pay a $10,000. Are we taking it out of context? Is it every hairdresser, every maxi driver? How does it work? Break it down for us.
So we as leaders in a country, okay, whether you're in the political sphere, whether you are in the religious sphere, whatever, we have to understand that we must never take a position where you create chaos in a society. Okay? So, in the Global Forum Bill, so this is what you call they call it a multi-bus bill, where you stick a bunch of legislation inside one bill that comes before Parliament. And I mean, on that bill, we had like 2 days to go through about 150 pages of legislation. One part of the amendment was to raise the fines for not registering a business. So let's look at the law. The law has always been that way, right? If you are engaged in a commercial trade, there is a requirement for you to register as a business for you to continue. That's the law. All the minister have done, he has raised the penalties and fines for that. So the law has always been there.
What was the
Does it?
previous fine?
I think $200. It was misdemeanor fines from the 1940s or 50s, somewhere around there, right? So he has modernized it. He has, bring it up to standard with regards to ticket and tint and whatever. But the point that I want to make is this whole chaos about, the tanty who's selling she vegetables in front of she house, or you have a little parlor selling chubby and sweet drink, that you will now face a penalty and fine of 10,000 or something. No, that's not the case. So what differentiates a commercial business from one of these snow cone man, the chili BB man? For an enterprise to be considered a commercial business, it must have some characteristics. So I want to tell you these characteristics. There must be a capital outlay, building, land, infrastructure, whatever. There must be an investing component. I would have put out $50,000, $100,000 as an investment in something. There must be a component of marketing. Am I advertising what I'm doing? Do I have a billboard? Do I have a banner in front of the place? The activity must be consistent. It must not be seasonal. It must be consistent. And the most important thing is, am I earning more than my tax credit for the year? So your tax credit for the year is about $90,000. In the eyes of the Board of Inland Revenue, if you are not generating $90,000 for the year, I have no interest in you, because that means you're not doing anything that generating that type of money. So the chili BB man will continue selling the chili BB. The snow cone man will continue selling the snow cone. And a lot of these other small seasonal type activities, because of the fact that the threshold of $90,000, that's the first thing you look at. The second thing, are you employing people outside of your home? If it's somebody selling roti from their house, right? And it's mom, dad, and one child in the house. 12 o'clock, they sell roti for a couple hours as a mean of income. Because there is no employment activity where you have to register somebody at the NIB board, there's no interest by the NIB. Okay? If there's no requirement for an insured or insurance in terms of what you're doing, then there is no interest from the state on that. So there's a lot of factors that will determine whether you really fall as a commercial activity with the characteristics that I've just explained, and that you'd require to register. And so there's a lot of panic, there's a lot of bad information outside there. But just remember, who makes the decision that you are operating something legal or illegally? We are not importing officers from Russia or the Ukraine or Europe. These are Trinidadians and Tobagonians who would have grown up with Snow Cone Man, Chili BB Man, the Doubles Man, and they understand the nature of that business. Now, if a fella come and he build a little place in front of the house, and he put 4 windows and he put up a sign with an air condition. And every Monday morning he in Panama bringing 10 suitcases. Well, then that's a red flag because you see the nature has changed. So to the man on the street, the auditor, the field officer who is visiting, let's say, for instance, Mayaro, once for the month, he will observe that activity and he will determine, hey, look, this looks like a serious commercial activity. Perhaps we need you to do a registration. So let's go beyond that now. Why it is now, it is important for small businesses, those who qualify, to register. I'll tell you this, one of the biggest problems we had, or I saw during COVID, when the state issued those grants to help small businesses. Right now, remember, rural communities like Mayara and Rio Claro are littered with small businesses, right? But one of the requirements was that you need to prove that you're a small business. Now, to prove that you're a small business, one, you have to have a financial history. The bank must be able to show a bank statement where you're depositing money, you're taking out money, or show receipts, show a book, a ledger where you're buying stuff and you're selling stuff. And plenty of our small business people couldn't qualify because there was no records. The amount of fishermen who were doing this small trade came to me and said, look, you want to apply for the grant? I said, okay, you have a little book you just have where you just buy your gas, go out, show me before COVID how much business you was doing. You have anything? No. And in order to be able to get support from the state in times of crisis, the state must know you. And if you are registered as a business, well, then the state doesn't know you, and that's a problem already. Now, the second part, with the new international regulations concerning banking and finance, very, very soon, to do government service, you'd have to get tax clearance, VAT clearance, any kind of clearance, probably to apply for a visa to go just now. You'd have to have the bank giving you some kind of clearance. You must have a history in order to get certain things done. So, do you know, Marsha, as a businessman, if I have an account in the bank under Rushton Parry and I send $3,000 into that account, they're going to ask me, Parry, where you get that money from? Now, I cannot tell them that, look, I decided to sell 1 or 2 items in my wife's store and I want to put it together. They say, no, you have to deposit that cash in a commercial account. So, as the things evolve, it is going to get very complex and complicated in terms of being able to, satisfy a lot of global requirements. So I don't know if I answered the question that you asked, whether we're going to see a running down and a chasing down of small businessmen and things. No, it's not going to happen. There's one more point I want to make on that. There's the fallacy, and I hear it over and over, that all these small fellas who are registered, they suck in the country, right? That when the rest are we paying tax, they suck in the country and they're paying this and they're paying that, but they want service. Let me tell you, every single citizen's country pays tax. You see, VAT is not only a consumption tax, it's a service tax. Every single thing that you do in this country, you pay VAT. So what the state has done to capture that group of people in what we call the informal society, they pay their share, whatever little it is, through the VAT system. And therefore, there are very few citizens, well, unless you're a child, suckling milk for free, then I think every other citizen in this country puts a part of their revenue into the tax system at the end of the day. So I do not think there's going to be any mass registration of small businesses, very small businesses, people who are making a seasonal hustle. I don't think that is going to happen. That's not the intention as far as I'm aware.
I think you actually answered it very, very clearly, and I applaud you for that. Doubles might be a little bit special, though.
Mm-hmm.
I think well, I guess it depends. You see, it depends on, let's say, UE doubles versus the small man. So I think you answered in terms of how much you earn, the setting up.
So let me ask you this then, right? We and let me tell you, I sympathize with the doubles man because he comes on the brunt every time. What about lawyers and doctors who accept cash payments?
Good points. What about them?
I suspect there is a lot of professionals who do not file their full amount of income at the end of the day. and they take cash from patients, they take cash from businesses, right? I've had specialists tell me they don't want check, please pay cash. I know why they want cash for. So you have to report it for tax purposes. You have a lot of homeowners, people with beach houses and so on, scattered all over the country. They are earning revenue, but these houses are not registered as guest houses and so on. So it's businesses that are operating, revenues, but they're not paying any taxes. But you know what? The doubles man up in your face, and he's an easy target.
I
So,
apologize to the doubles man. I'm so sorry because you've raised a good point. I mean, but there is a lot of tax that we on.
At the end of the day, there's a lot of leakages. I mean, the IMF report said it very, very clearly that there's a huge amount of tax leakage in the country. And for any government of the day, and we have to be fair here, any government of the day, whether it's the PNM, the UNC, the next one coming, tax revenue, it is one of the largest area of money that you can get to, invest in your country, infrastructure, and so on. One of the key things here that was alarming to me in the 2023 financial stability report that was released the other day is that the low amount of infrastructure spending, I think it was just like under $2 billion in terms of the infrastructure development fund. Now, one would know if the state doesn't invest in infrastructure and those kind of things where you can drive work for people and so on, you have a problem, in terms of stagnation of growth and so on. So, I mean, taxes will always be a funny thing. My gut feeling is I don't think Trinidadians and Tobagonians don't want to pay taxes. I feel we're just not happy on how the taxes are being spent. I think if we were accounting better, if people were seeing improvements in service, in roads, in power, at the hospital, if we were seeing improvements, I don't think the kind of uproar that you get with any tax, whether it be property tax or this, penalties and so on, I think the country, we're not satisfied with the quality of service that we get as tax-paying citizens. I think that is where the real problem lies.
But you do advise that small businesses do register for the reasons, having that history, being able to access grants, etc. So you do advise that they actually should register.
So a young man came to my office yesterday. He said that, he wanted some help with a business plan because he wants to apply for one of the agricultural grants. He's a fisherman. He wants to invest in a new boat engine. He wants to do lobster potting. He wants to be able to go out, further on the North Coast and whatever. So I said, okay, but to help you with the business, now give me whatever information you have. He hustled. He have a boat. He have a 2-stroke engine. He has some cash. He go out. He bring 2 fellas on. So there was no data to work with. Now, obviously, I mean, I was able to fix something for him in terms of the information, the limited information he gave me. And I wrote a business plan for him. I actually did it myself. And I put it in his file and I said, look, one, and then keep your fingers crossed. But the challenge for him is that he's having a cost to operate this little business he has, but he has no way to write off back anything, write off cost for anything, no way to clear his expenditure. Now, he's not registered to the Board of Inland Revenue. He has no NIS. He has nothing. The fellas he are hiring to go on the boat, they are not insured. All of these things are going to be addressed in the new fisheries bill that is coming. There's a fisheries bill, a 300-page fisheries bill that, has been stuck in the parliament for the last 5 years. When that bill takes effect, well, probably in the next parliament, these are issues that are going to hit fishermen 2 slap across the face. And if you don't start addressing some of those things now, in terms of organizing yourself, you see, too many of these little things we treat it as a hustle rather than a business. And fishing is a big hustle in my arrow rather than a business. And if I mean, I could tell you, Marsha, I have met with the fishing associations. I've tried to sit with these guys. We have 2 facilities that have collapsed here in my area. You know why? Because the boys and them, they refuse to put on a coverall and a steel tip shoes to go in the storage facility according to the HSC regulations. So nobody wants to go in the facility to sell the fish. But you could stand up outside on the road under a carrot shed with a short pants, bareback, and a rubber slippers and sell the fish on the side of the road. And that is the kind of challenge that we are finding. And any government going into power, it will be the same issues, it will be the same challenges, because there's a lot of work that has to be done from the community level in terms of, fixing some of these issues for small business. Entrepreneurship is where we need to go. We need to do probably 100 new small businesses in the 41 constituencies to really try and put a lot of people back to work and so on. And the state is doing nothing to help small businesses. My arrow is ripe. It is ripe for our tourism sector, our ecotourism sector. I mean, we have 17 miles of beach, 2 FIFA class football stadiums or football grounds, if you want to call it here in Mayaro. Wide open roads, power, water, good financial system. 2 credit agencies that are capitalized almost $200 million in Mayaro. And yet, we still have one of the highest level of unemployment amongst youth in this country. So again, the state has a role to play. We as parliamentarians have a role to play. And I'm doing my part, but sometimes I feel that the state is not really clearing the way for that to happen as well.
All right. I'm going into Dr. Kevin Saron's time, but I do have one thing to ask you on because we were supposed to talk about the July 2024 economic bulletin that the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago would have put out. Just based on my own reading, and this is where I bring professionals in like yourself to talk. Is it that I read it correctly where I'm seeing the global GDP going up, but local GDP going down?
If you mean if there's an expectation of global growth, I think from the reports I read, yes. What we have is some regression because of our reliance on energy prices. You would see for the first 9 months of this year, we have a shortfall of about $5.5 billion. Out of that, our capital expenditure was $1.2 billion less. So we come back to the point of, we have to spend less as well, and it really stifles a bit of the issues around employment in terms of the state employment and so on. We saw, in terms of that report, a slight growth in the non-energy market, which is a good thing, but we need to do more. We've been talking about diversification for the last 9-10 years, probably longer than that. And there has been no real impact, in terms of some of the work that's been done. I think the Manufacturing Association, the manufacturing sector, has done well on their own, despite whatever challenges in terms of small business, in terms of ease of doing business and so on. So when you look at that report, that came out, it had some very, very interesting information. And I think the Minister of Finance really has to use that report to anchor some of his policies, which I trust he would do in terms of, digital transformation, diversification, the focus on agriculture, getting that $7 billion food bill down. Right now, I always remind people, out of that $7 billion, $2.5 billion in that is alcohol. So that says something about our consumption of alcohol as well. Transfers and subsidies, it's a huge area that grew by $3 billion over the last 2 years. What it means when your transfers and subsidies on an increasing trajectory, it means that the state they have to come in and try to push the welfare network more and more and more and more and more, while we ought to be trying to get people off welfare, get that network shrunk. We are seeing between 2022 to 2024 that expenditure of transfers and subsidies went from $30 billion to $33 billion. So again, it is policy driven. Our wage bill, there's another highlight that came out of that. We moved in 2021 from a $7.1 billion wage bill to $8 billion now, our public sector wage bill. This is why you find the state always have a challenge in terms of offering 10% and 15% in terms of salaries and wages. They look at 1%, 1/4%, 0.5%. Because one of the biggest issues here as well, every time you raise the fixed rate for wages, it means your long-term spend on pensions and so on, double and triple at the end of the day. So all of these things, the CPO and the Ministry of Finance, they take all these things into consideration. My take is that we have to drive the cost of living down. We can't push more money into the system. We could overinflate the system. We could heat it up. But how do we get goods and services cheaper? How do we substitute? How do we get our $300 per hour? We get more value for money at the end of the day. So those are the kind of things that you look at. One other thing that jumped out at me is our debt to GDP ratio. Again, it stands at about 72%. Now, you hear the Minister of Finance talk about Japan and America and Italy and so on being 110, 120% in terms of their debt to GDP ratio. But those are advanced societies. Their healthcare systems work, their social systems work, their infrastructure works. Ours don't. So even at 75% GDP, it really is a warning to us that we need to find new sources of revenue. And that is where I think we keep stumbling. We have had no considerable sources of revenue in any real meaningful way over the last 10 years outside of the one trick pony we call oil and gas. That too is a challenge. Even if Manatee comes on stream, if by some miracle Dragon comes on stream by 2027, 2028, we're still going to be short by 1.5 billion standard cubic feet of gas to the Point Lisas Industrial Estate. We have the green hydrogen plant. If the AMA ever gets off the ground and give the approval for that, they are looking to get operational by 2029 to provide about 70 tons of green hydrogen that is going to reduce the requirement for natural gas to, most of the urea and Methanex facilities up there. So I think, if the state doesn't put its eggs in a row and start looking at these things, I think we will continue just, rolling along, wishing for the best. And we will see no big improvement going forward. And that's scary. And that's what's concerning to me at this point in time. So that's what I got out of that July report in terms of the highlighted areas and things that we need to look at and see how the minister is addressing that in the budget next week, Monday.
Well, thank you very much. Our hour flew really, really quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No problem. And let me just say hello to Dr. Saran as well. I listen to all your podcasts and your videos and so on. You're on target all the time, my friend. I hope to meet you one day. Take care, Marsha. Keep good.
Bye.
Hi, Marsha.
Dr.
Thank you for having me on
Kevin
the show.
Saran, thank you very much. So can I call you Kevin?
Sure.
Have we ever met in person? I can't remember. I don't think so.
I
Once
think
or
once,
twice.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. Fine. Well, I'm going to call you Kevin anyway. You put out a media release and it got to my phone. And funny enough, I had just made a post suggesting that the opposition leader in this budget presentation, rather than do a budget reply, what I would like to see is an alternative budget. And person said, but she put out a manifesto, why she need a budget? And I explained, I tried to explain that it's one thing when you're not in government to make a bunch of promises. Now, of course, PNM makes promises as well. But that's the point. You want to be able to look at a budget, and I can look at a PNM budget and, from 2018, and then I go 2019, 2020. I said, but these things have not materialized. And you promise these things, and it's like little election goodies, but it's not really feasible. So you put out a manifesto document that sounds grand, but we don't actually see how are you going to take this manifesto document and bring it into reality. So I liked that you were able to, from using, obviously you are in Ministry of Health, you are in that sphere. So you were able to take her health plan and break it down and ask what I think to be good questions. Before you start to speak, let me just say good evening to SM, who has just joined us and they've said good evening. The name is SM. I tried to make sure to say good evening to anybody who says good evening to us. They called your name in particular. So I'm going to hand over the floor to you. We have about 15 minutes before the show finishes and we get cut off. Have a take at it.
Yeah, so what I would like to say first of all is when I had a look at this policy plan that they put out, they put out about 50 policies. And what I've realized by looking at these policies is that they were almost no more different than previous policies that other parties have put out in the past. They have really focused on almost like building infrastructure for the healthcare system, right? But if you were to break down the healthcare system, And the budget for the healthcare system, the budget this year, sorry, the last fiscal year was about 6.88 billion, right? And they spent about 5.5 billion in recurring expenses. So it means that they have just roughly about 1.38 billion to do upgrades of any sort, or. So when they put out things like, for example, one of the policies, as I would recall clearly, is that they wanted to build a specialized burns unit at the Children's Hospital, or at least next door. There's no real cost benefit analysis put into this thought, because you have to take into consideration how many burns have we had around the Point Lisas industrial estate over the past 20 years, per se. We've never had a mass casualty in Trinidad and Tobago of that nature. Are we preparing for one? Is it with the cost of what we are putting out to deal with it? We have a specialized burns institution in San Fernando General Hospital. Apart from this, all the major hospitals in Trinidad and Tobago, they carry the plastic surgery services, which cater for burns patients as well. So are we just really, putting up these structures for the sake of putting up a structure? It's not really feasible. And then you're going to be spending millions, and these units don't come cheap. Everything medical, you have to add 1 or 2 zeros to the end of it. This is going to cost you hundreds of millions of dollars. This is just for a burns unit. And they did a similar thing with the institution. They wanted to build some cath labs in the hospitals. We have about 5 major hospitals in Trinidad. To build a cath lab is roughly going to cost about 100 million TT dollars per cath lab. And in the same sentence, they said that San Fernando has a cath lab that is not functional because it lacks staffing. So we can't staff the one that we have, but we want to build 5 more. So I find these things very concerning. And if you look at how medical services are done, especially for services that are really subspecialized, for example, cath labs, for those of you all who don't know, basically if you have a blockage in the heart, that is where they put a stent to open up the vessels for you. Now, it sounds great and grand to the audience that they're preaching to, that, these are the things that they want to hear, that we're going to build cath labs in every hospital. But again, you're spending a couple $100 million per cath lab, per hospital, and these all have to be staffed, and these are going to add to the recurring expenses, that are going to be cumulative every year. So every year, but the taxes are going to have to raise to cover this cost if you want to do something extra. So these things are very, very concerning, and it falls in the same template of all the things that have been happening almost since our independence. Everybody wants to build something and have a name on it, but nobody wants to deal with maintenance, for example, or cutting back on expenses and improving the service delivery to patients. I have gone through these policies, Marsha, and there are 50 policies, and literally almost every single one could be critiqued in a way that will make it not look like something of substance. I even want to throw out a challenge, right? If the person whoever came up with these policies are willing to come on your program, on your talk show, and debate me on these policies, I would gladly take that up. That is how confident I am that I could tear apart any of these policies, because they're no different from the ones that we've had in the past.
Well, I'm going to send out that message.
Make it happen. Make it happen.
They
came up with 50. I will choose 10. I will choose 10 out of the 50, and we'll debate on those policies. And I would love to hear their defense, because you can't discredit them without giving them the chance to rebut, the structure of their policies. So that would be unfair to them. So I would appreciate the opportunity to have that conversation with them.
All right. So do we continue? I'm not sure. I can just move on because you dropped me.
I would be considered a subject matter expert in this field. This is my area of expertise. And I do a lot of social media content, but I prefer not to speak on these areas because it will be unfair to somebody who, it's almost like you're competing on different playing grounds. But when you have somebody putting out these policies at a very national level across the board and hoping that, you're going to capture some people killing a mosquito with a bazooka, it's really not feasible. People don't understand now. People hear what they want to hear. They hear things like they're going to build cath labs in every hospital, and they clap and they think that is great. But they don't understand the sustainability, the feasibility, the maintenance issues with the staffing arrangements. Let me give you an example. If we have 5 cath labs in Trinidad and Tobago, right, each one of these is going to have to be stocked with stents, for example, for your heart or for aneurysm, right? A stent for your heart costs roughly about $15,000. A stent for an aneurysm costs anywhere between about $60,000 to $180,000. Now, if you build 5, it means that you're going to have 5 sets of consumables in each hospital, right? Where's this money coming from? I have asked the question, where's this money coming from? Is it coming from, are we going to be borrowing from the HSF? are they going to be taking it from a different, a different national, different ministry? If so, how much are they going to take? Which ministries are they going to take? Where's the money going to come from? So I'm very concerned about some of the policies that I saw there.
Okay, so fix the supply chain to prevent the shortage of drugs and supplies that now hinder the work of doctors and nurses in many of our healthcare facilities. That was one of the policies, right? I mean, and that wasn't building anything.
Yeah. So, and that is a great question. But you see, I'm not sure if whoever came up with that policy also understood the reason that the supply chain is not properly well fixed, right? In the hospital system, when you apply for a contract, for example, you have to register your company and then take that registration and carry it to the hospital and say, I would like to supply you with consumable A or B. When you send in your documentation, you said that syringe costs maybe $20, right? The length of time that it takes to get the payment for that $20 is roughly about 6 months, and that's been very conservative. So the people are forced to mark up their stuff to get back that money for that 6 months that their money is being spent out there that they can't. So that syringe that would cost about $20 now costs about $50 or $60. And that's just a rough example. It happens across the board. So again, they do that to prevent, it's almost like they create a backlog of purposefully holding back payments so that they could keep sustaining, getting consumable 6 months worth of credit, if you want to put it like that. And that is where the problem is. So in order to fix that, you have to basically pay the people on time. And again, I ask the question, where is the money going to come from?
Being efficient, maybe.
Well, none of these policies have drawn towards efficiency. All of them is either building something, and it doesn't. None of these policies really amount to any sort of improving the efficiency of the system.
Okay, so as a deputy political leader of a political party, I mean, it means that you are prepared, I assume, to take government and put plans in place. So you've said, okay, the UNC's health plans are PR gimmicks, they mama guy, they have a lot of questions to answer regarding where the money coming from, what's the purpose, have you done cost benefit analysis? Let's talk to, so I understand the cath lab and the burns unit, but surely fixing the supply chain to prevent the shortage of drugs and supplies that now hinder the work of doctors and nurses in many of our healthcare facilities. Surely that's a very important one. I mean, we hear it all the time, Yeah. I'm sure you experience it, and I know that there may be some areas that you cannot discuss, but you hear of shortages of supplies. How would you fix it? So, okay, you're saying UNC's plan is a mess. What would be the NTA's plan, or at least one of these, just this one, because we do have a shortage?
Yeah. So firstly, you have to start to look at this. And let me just say, this is really a rebuttal of the policies. This is not an anti-Kamala rant. This is not an anti-UNC rant. This is not even an anti-PNM rant or any rant, right? This is just taking the policies that are common to all political parties that have ever been in power and discussing them, because they seem to be the same template. They tell the people what they want to hear and not necessarily what will fix the system. But to go back to your question, you're asking how do we fix the supply chain, more or less, right? So
what will fix the system?
Well, you have to look at it in a holistic way. In order to get the money from there, you have to save it from somewhere else, or you have to put in the money. It's like what they're trying to do is like you have a bucket with a hole, and they're trying to fill it with water, and instead of plugging the hole, they're trying to add more water, which is taking more money from the taxpaying citizens, and that is where the problem. So it's either you put in more or you prevent it from coming out. You have to make the system basically more efficient in that case. So if you, for example, were to build an ex-hospital tomorrow, that hospital may take 600-800 people on average, right? You spend about $20 million or $24 million per year. That is fixed recurring expenses. So instead of doing those things, we need to more focus on sustainability and improving the service that we already have. That I'll draw back to the example, the cath lab, for example. Instead of building 5 cath labs, why not utilize the one that we have in San Fernando? We have one that's working in Mount Hope. Well, why not utilize the one that we have in San Fernando, improve staffing, spend that same $300 or $400 million that you was spent to build 2 more cath labs or 3 more cath labs and buy consumables. Run a double-hour shift, for example. So you run 12 o'clock shifts, 24-hour shifts for these people. So you get more done in a shorter space of time. You don't have to pay all these recurring expenses. So it's really all about sustainability. You using resources they have to do the best that they could without burdening the taxpayers in them. Of course, there are going to be times when you need to improve the system and you need to dip your hands into whatever to get more money. But that time has never come. We have always depended on just simply building stuff just to get our names out there.
What would you do specifically to fix the supply chain, to fix the shortage that we have right now?
Right. So the same example. You have a bucket with a hole, and there's only two ways to fix it. Either add more water, or you plug the hole. And I'm saying that
what is the hole that needs to be plugged right now?
I just give an example. The Catla, for example, we have resources that are wasting. You have to audit the system to see where the checks and balances are, where the money is basically going into the healthcare system. $5.5 billion come from recurring expenses. We have 1.38 billion. Where is that money going?
Okay, so you would start with an audit.
It has to start with an audit to see where the checks and balances are.
Review the Children's Life Fund legislation. Talk to me about that one.
That is another one that sounds like, to anybody that's listening, that is just listening at a very superficial level, that they're going to add more diseases to Children's Life Fund, so a lot more people could get access to money. I applaud them, and that is great at a very superficial level. But for the average person who is more or less an intellectual and asks themselves, well, where is this money going to come from? Let's say there were 10 disease processes. No, it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. My question is, how are they planning to do it? And how it's going to be feasible? And I don't see it being feasible in the way that they have described it. If you have 10 disease processes that you could send in a request form and say, well, I have this disease process, I want to get funding to assist with my medication, sure. But when you add 10 more disease processes, and these things are not cheap, and this is you're talking about a disease process that not one individual have. You're talking about thousands of people have this. For example, HIV or something. Those medications cost almost $20,000 to $30,000 a month. So when you add those things on top of what you already have, you have to ask yourself, where is the money going to come from? Is it going to come from that 1.38 billion? Like how many times are we going to use that same money? We're going to run out of stuff.
So has the NTA put out a manifesto?
So we have already developed a healthcare policy manifesto. We are going to be opening a couple sub offices very soon. Within the next one is actually scheduled to open. I don't want to give the exact date, but at that particular meeting, more than likely some of our policies will come out, particularly healthcare. I'm hoping that they give the okay. But the policies are already done.
Assuming you're going to say where the money coming from when you put out that manifesto.
It's about sustainability. I'm trying to say that the resources that we have in Trinidad and Tobago are more than enough to do what we need to do. Things like improving the patient care, things like customer service, those things would go a long way. It's not just about money and where the money is coming from. It's a holistic approach in dealing with medicine. And it's all about sustainability and, not burdening the taxpayers.
But you're saying that you're saying that UNC's health policies, as it stands, are not, some of them are not sustainable. Some of them, at least. Some of them you're saying, it just kind of sounds airy-fairy. But without a proper audit, we don't know how you're going to actually make that happen. So NTA will put out their own health policies soon. Yeah. Can we, is it safe to say that you will list out where the money coming from to do all of the different things? And you will be able to show how it's sustainable, how your plan is sustainable versus the UNC plan?
Sustainability means using the resources that we have to get the job done. What they are saying is that they are coasting on that they want to add a few more jobs, and they're not saying where the money is to come from. And that is for them to defend, not me. Our policies are going to be about sustainability and using what we have to do the best for the nation, instead of opening up other hospitals or building 10 other things that are going to have ongoing recurring expenses. I'm asking, where is this money coming from when they're saying that? And I'm saying that we could use the money from that or what we already have to put back into the system to make it better for the citizens. So that is a question for them to defend, Marsha, not me.
Well, I have to see your policy first, your policy document, and then I'll be able to compare it, and then I'll be able to hold you to it. To this interview, I'll be able to look and compare. I have a question from a listener. What healthcare, I'm now reading it, sorry. What healthcare business model does TNT use as an example to fix our healthcare? For example, do we use England or USA's business model to correct ours?
Well, I wouldn't be able to say for sure what they've modeled at. our healthcare system, but most of our hospitals were built by the French. So I have to assume that that is where our models came from. And a lot of the things that they built, I'll give you an example. For example, some of the plugs that you plug on equipment into on the walls are actually French plugs, believe it or not, in the hospitals. And that has been since they've been there and it's been abandoned. Some of them, most of them have been changed. But if you go in rooms that are not frequently used, you will see those things.
I hope that's on your manifesto to fix.
Much love.
There was a story of 6 maternal deaths in Mount Hope, and the files have gone missing. Do you care to comment on that?
So I could tie this into one of their policies as well, and I could also show you where the faults lie. Right? They have said that they would like to digitalize the system and to introduce a specific card, like almost like a card that you could take with all your healthcare information and carry it to each hospital. Right? That while it sounds good as well, has many flaws associated with it, because you have to ask yourself, if healthcare is something that everybody guards with their life, in terms of your health information, right? And for good reasons. It could scare you in your workplace, it could scare you with your relatives, your family. There's things they don't want getting out there. As a very small place, I mean, if you have let anybody have access to information, it could do you some harm. These cards could get lost. You have to ask how are they planning to institute this in the private systems? Are they going to be supplying them with the computers, the software? What's going to happen if system gets hacked? Even worse, what's going to happen if system goes down? Right now, we have a system being used in the radiology system, and they are almost out of hardware space. So after the reason being is after you do a CT scan and it's in the system for so long, it's either one or two things. Either the system, just like a hard drive, gets filled and you have to burn it on a CD and put it in a stack, which also costs money by itself, or it gets removed from the system. And the same thing is going to happen with the filing system unless they have something in place to back up all of these things. So plenty of things could go wrong with that system.
I'm sure it was not a digital file that was lost at Mount Hope. I'm nearly certain it's one of those manila folders that were lost.
Yeah, but equally said, digital files could get corrupted. They could, things could happen to them. They could get wiped off the system. Your system could crash. I mean, they're false.
So you're not a fan of going digital? Is that what you're saying?
No, I appreciate going digital, just not in a way that they are saying that we should go digital. Okay. For example, I think that okay, go ahead.
Oh, no. Well, we've come to the end of the show, so I was going to thank you and tell you that I'm looking forward to having you back on after the NTA rolls out their health policy, and because we're at the end of the show anyway, so I think that I should bring you back on. So for 2 reasons, we're going to debate, but I think that we'll debate after you present your document. Sure. And then I'll find someone to debate.
Right. Well, I would like to debate the person who came up with the policies.
Yes. Well, I'll have to find that out for you.
That would be appreciated.
It may be a group of people. It may be a group of people.
That'll be quite fine. One versus a few, nothing out of the ordinary.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for taking the time out. I did enjoy the media release, so thank you very much for being willing to stand behind your release. Okay. Bye, guys. Bye, Winston. Bye, SM. Winston commented quite a lot. And bye to, I'm not sure who's behind me right now.
David McIntyre.
Hi, David. Okay. I'll see you next week, David. Bye.
Okay, bye, Marsha. It was a very informative program, and I think you touched on a lot of important issues that the people should really know about. So that was Marsha Walker, host of today's edition of Hard Talk. Every Thursday, Marsha will be here with us from 4:05 till 6 p.m. right here at Power 102 Digital. Her guests today, her invited guests were Ken Ali, MP Rushton Parry, and Dr. Kevin Sarah.